This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan. I guess I was 19, maybe 20 years old. And I had moved back to New Orleans to start college. Didn't have any money. And I had a roommate, a guy that, back then you'd put your name up on a board at the college and, seeking a roommate. I guess people still do that. I don't know. It seems kind of dangerous to me. But anyway, I wound up becoming fast friends with this fellow. And we shared a house together in mid-city New Orleans. And it was old. It was so old. And like many homes there, stucco siding, and we had the lower portion of this house, and the landlord lived above us, and the landlord and his wife would get into furious fights. Well, it was cold out. It was in February, and I'll never forget this. My roommate, his bedroom housed the window unit for the entire apartment. So his apartment was freezing cold, and it's kind of a shotgun. So I had the front unit, didn't have an air conditioner. But my roommate, the next room down the hall was his. He had the air conditioner and kept it on full blast because New Orleans, most of the time, is hot. But this time of year, it was February, cold. Well, our landlord and his wife at about 2 o'clock in the morning started fighting. And they were speaking in Spanish, yelling. They were Cuban immigrants. And then they started stomping on the floor. And all of a sudden, I heard a huge crash. And the crash was not them falling through the ceiling and landing in our bedrooms. It was the sound of the entire window frame falling out of our apartment, being pulled out by this gigantic window unit. And I ran into my roommate's bedroom, and he spoke with a very thick Cajun accent. And I'll never forget, he's like, "Bruh, what's happened? They're gone crazy, yeah." And we went outside and started yelling at him, "Hey, our window fell out." The guy replaced it the next day and apologized. But it just goes to show you, you don't know quite what you're going to get in a neighbor at any point in time. Today on Body Bags, I'm going to talk about another landlord. Another landlord who apparently, according to him, had all that he can possibly stand. And what happened when he finally had all that he could stand? Well, it led to a double homicide. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. Dave, I got to tell you, brother, I'm glad I don't rent anymore. They were very nice people. They loved rum. They were very generous to us. They had given us a place to stay. We're struggling college students. And they were both refugees from Cuba. They came over, I think, in the boat crisis in 1980. And there's a big Cuban population, or there was, in New Orleans. And so they, as there is obviously in South Florida, but there was a big group that settled in New Orleans, and they were there. And of course, they had a place to rent, and we were very grateful for it. But boy, what an experience. But can you imagine having a landlord that is so fed up with you that he decides to end your life? This fella that I'm referring to is a fella named Chad Allen Reed, and of all places, he's from Battle Creek, Michigan, the home of all manner of cereals, I think.
That is
and
where
the Kellogg
this starts.
Company.
Yeah, but you know what? Chad Allen Reed has a record going back to Florida. He's been tagged in several states with illegal activities. to the point where he's not allowed to have a gun.
Ooh.
So when Chad Allen Reed gets mad at the people who are renting from and he shoots them, he's already committing a crime by owning the gun he shoots with.
Yeah, just being in possession. Yeah.
Yes, just being in possession of a gun, he's already breaking the law. Chad Allen Reed, he's the reason we know what happened. But do you trust the person that committed the crime to tell you the truth?
That's part of being an investigator. From the perspective of, can you believe what they're saying? Here's my default position with this, Dave. Can I scientifically verify what they're saying based upon what I'm seeing at the scene? And that goes to things, everything from any kind of trauma that I'm obviously seeing on the body, any kind of trace evidence that's left behind that gives you an idea. Say, for instance, if you've got blood trails or you've got spent casings, all these sorts of things that may or may not have been cleaned up. Remember, criminals don't always think about the details like we do. We have time to sit around and think about the details as forensics people. And in this case, we've got a case of this perpetrator, and we can call him a perpetrator at this point, of trying to mask a crime with fire as well. And so that you combine all those things, he's telling you something. Can you validate it scientifically by looking at the evidence you have before you, given the communications that he is of his own free will making a statement about?
And this is why investigators hold back certain pieces of information about a crime so people can't just willy-nilly come in and claim they've done something, so they can't take credit for a murder. All right. In this particular case, they set up a tip line. And the reason is you've got a young couple, Joe Soule, who is 34. His girlfriend, Jaclyn Lepird, is 31. And they have been renting a place from Chad Allen Reed, who is 54, or 56, rather. They go missing. And after a couple of days, not talking to your friend or your brother, sister, mom, dad, looking for them, they start coming by. It's not as if they left on vacation, because people would have known that. Nobody knows where they are. The one person who does see them is Chad Allen Reed, and apparently lives close enough to them because he complains about the noise they make. He says he doesn't get to sleep much because they're always partying.
The reason I wanted to tell that story in the beginning, Dave, about myself and my roommate, was that, let me tell you how this situation is configured. He had a home, and he was on the bottom floor. They were up top. I don't know about you. I've lived in some really crappy apartments over the course of my life, and it's amazing what you hear through the walls. It's amazing what you hear through the floorboards. I mean, you can hear everything, and it's not just people talking or arguing. It's toilets flushing, man. If you've got people that are playing loud music, they're bouncing around, they're partying upstairs, maybe they got friends coming over. And from what we understand, Lepird and Soule did, in fact, like to party. There's maybe a total disregard for the proximity to the landlord at this point in time. And from what the police are saying, he had confronted them on multiple occasions, and it would end up poorly. And here's another thing. You get to the end of the month, and you're looking for rent, and you got people that don't pay up. And I think that kind of played into it as well. So you've got this set of circumstances that are escalating all the while. You've already kind of gotten a situation where you've got people that are fighting over noise. Maybe the money doesn't come as frequently and consistently as it should. And it all makes the perfect storm. And of course, in this particular case, you got two people that wound up losing their lives and were never seen again by their family. You know, Dave, I've often stated relative to the methodologies that are employed to kill somebody with, you can learn a lot about the state of mind of a perpetrator relative to what tools they have handy, how they utilize those tools. And perhaps, just perhaps, the level of violence that's involved with a death. And in this case, we don't have just one tool. This is not a matter of simple gunshot wounds. This is actually a matter of cutting and bludgeoning in addition to gunshot wounds.
You know, one of the things about this, Joe, is the story that Chad Allen Reed tells. I think we keep saying his full name, not because he's a felon, but because it sounds like a pop star name. It sounds like he should be in a boy band. Chad Allen Reed. Or maybe
we're also from the South, Dave, and so people down in the South tend to use the full names like that.
That's true.
You know, Chad Allen Reed.
And nicknames like Bull, Man. Yeah.
Bubba.
All right. Bubba, yeah. All right. So Chad Allen Reed is the owner of the property. These are the renters, and he claims that Mr. Soule, in a fight, comes at Chad Allen Reed with a knife, and he had nothing except to pull a gun and shoot him. Concealed carry people have guns that can't get to him as quick as he got to his.
It was a matter of did he show up prepared? You know, because what we do know, and again, this goes back to circumstantial evidence, is that there had been an ongoing fight and there was friction. And on this night, which it happened in the evening, according to the perpetrator, by his own admission, it happened actually on October the 7th. It was in the evening time. And he had had another bad night's sleep. And you begin to compile or pile on with these issues that are stressors in this environment, and it's going to boil over. And so it blew up on the night of October the 7th. And this is kind of interesting. He paints Soule as the aggressor at this point in time. And as I always say, Dave, the dead are mute. There's no way they can defend themselves or offer alternative arguments or anything like that. So the best we can do is to try to get an idea relative to injuries, proximity, those sorts of things. And certainly, he's thrown out the date of October 7th. When we get to the bodies, those bodies marry up relative to the length of time, again, back to postmortem interval, which we've spoken of many times. Does the science marry up with the detail that he is actually given in this particular case? So he decides at this point in time, because he claims that Mr. Soule pulled a knife on him. Now, where it was being held, where it was being carried, was it in his waistband? Was it in his pocket? Was it in his back pocket? He presents with a knife. He's painted by the perpetrator as the assailant, as the aggressor, and he claims he had no choice but to shoot him. He shoots him in the chest. If this is not bad enough, Miss Lepird, who is Mr. Soule's girlfriend, she either witnesses this, eyes on the circumstances, or hears. Now, that's the thing about it, is that for those in the audience that have never been around gunfire a lot, it stands out head and shoulders above any other sound that you're going to have, because there is that distinguishing crack that sound makes in the air. It splits the air like nothing else. You'll hear people many times say that they thought that they heard a backfire that is emanating from a vehicle that's running somewhere. But when you hear a backfire and you hear a gunshot, trust me, they are completely different. Now, she's in close proximity to this because they're at the same residence. So it's not like it's some distant event that's happening off in the woods. This is kind of a rural area. It's not like you might have a deer hunter out there or something like this. This is in her approximate area.
And based on what happens next, she had to have been there as it took place to react to it.
Yeah, and that's where it really gets kind of fascinating, because Dave, she begins to sprint.
Right.
As I think I would if this were me and I was unarmed. Maybe you've borne witness to the shooting, you've heard the shooting, or maybe you've actually visualized this man who you're sharing your life with laying deceased there. She begins to run across the yard, and it's at that point in time that Chad Allen Reed shoots her in the back and drops her. But here's the thing about it. He didn't kill her. Remember, we've talked about things like weapons of opportunity many times on this show. And one of the things that was assessed with her, and actually he eventually admitted to, was that he took a pipe and began to beat her with it. Now, can you imagine this? He shot this woman in the back. She's writhing in pain.
As she's running.
Sure.
Gotta add that, though. In the first story, Joseph Soule, they call him Joey. Joey was coming at Mr. Reed with a knife, and Mr. Reed saw no other alternative but to shoot him. Then Jaclyn Lepird, 31-year-old girlfriend, she takes off running, and he shoots her in the back. If they're running away from you, they're not a threat to you. You cannot use deadly force if somebody's leaving you. You can if they're coming towards you. You can't if they're running away from you. You're going to lose.
Let's just say he's trying to justify his actions at this point in time. When we go to assess this gunshot wound that she has sustained, and they did not make clear what the range of fire is relative to her, my assumption is that it was outside the parameters for what would classify as an intermediate gunshot wound. Probably at some distance. You're not going to have a lot of stippling. You're not going to have any stippling at all. You're not going to have any evidence of it. Essentially, all you're going to have, it'll wind up being something, and here's something we really haven't talked about a lot on here. You'll see what's referred to as bullet wipe, which is when the bullet is spinning through the air. You'll get what's referred to as a friction abrasion, that if you think about the hole itself, okay, the defect where the bullet is entering, and if she's clothed, you'll see this evidence too. If you look at it very carefully, you can see actually the revolutions of the bullet create this kind of twisting motion on clothing, and you'll see the fabric kind of twist around. In addition to that, you'll see this kind of little abrasion ring around the entrance of the wound. Have you ever had somebody grab your wrist and twist it in opposite directions? That creates friction like that. So just imagine a bullet spinning because of rifling. It enters the skin and twists it so hard that it creates this little abrasion ring around.
Never even heard of this. That's called wiping?
Yeah, bullet wipe. And so when it hits, it will actually leave this little ring abrasion there. And that's really the only thing you have to hang your hat on. You can't say that it is from X number of feet away. All you can say, and you'll see this written over and over again in autopsy reports, it's at an indeterminate range is what they'll say. And that's the truth. They can't determine it. What we do know is that as Mr. Soule lay dead, not too far away from where Miss Lepird is knocked to the ground by this gunshot wound, we understand, per Chad Allen Reed's statement, that he set upon her after knocking her down with a gunshot, approached her. He had access to a metal pipe, and he begins to beat her, Dave. And then when that wasn't enough, he takes a knife, maybe the knife that he had alluded to with Soule, and attempts to cut her throat there in the yard. Again, we're back to that age-old question when it comes to perpetrators. You've killed somebody. Now, what in the heck are you going to do with the bodies? That's the big ask, isn't it? You think about this. It's one thing to strike out in anger and rage and violence to an individual, but what exactly are you going to do with bodies, a body, and then to make it matters even worse, what are you going to do with two bodies?
That's what I was thinking. You know, Joe, one body's bad enough. I am not even going to challenge that. That's an undertaking. What do I do with this? But it is only one. Now you've got two, and it's not just twice as many, two people. Twice as many people are going to come looking for them now.
What are you going to do with two bodies? Because it's not simply, and I'm not trying to diminish the value of life here.
Right.
Don't misunderstand this. I'm talking from an evidentiary standpoint. Not only do you have two bodies to get rid of, you've also doubled the amount of evidence that you have as well. And one of the things that we look for And I love this term in forensics, the term that's referred to as individualization of evidence. And it's a very broad kind of spectrum that we look at. When you think about individualization, just imagine if you're at home, you and I were talking about how much we love coffee just a moment ago. Everybody's got their own coffee cup at home. Well, those coffee cups, if you just kind of wipe them out, you don't throw them in the dishwasher or whatnot. Those coffee cups are individualized, and they're individualized to you as it applies to biological evidence, because you're transferring evidence to that cup. So it's not just, hey, look, this is Dad's coffee cup. Oh, it's Dad's coffee cup, and let me validate this for you because it's got his DNA on it.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, think how much more so when you're spilling blood, Dave. With Mr. Soule, when he shot in the chest, here's kind of an interesting little aside. Unless you hit somebody directly in the heart, and even in those cases, you're going to have problems. With gunshot wounds to the chest, many times you're going to have what's referred to as bloody aspirate. And what that means is that you will have individuals that will begin to cough up blood. They will also suck their own blood back into their airway. And what happens when they do that? I mean, just imagine in the normal course of life, you pick up your coffee cup and you take a big gulp and it goes, as they say, it goes down the wrong pipe. Okay, imagine you're traumatized by a gunshot wound and all of a sudden you have, taken in this breath and you're bleeding internally. Well, you take it down into your airway and then you expel it like this. So it's not just the seepage from a potential gunshot wound, it's actually you coughing blood up as a victim. Now you've got him that's in this status, Mr. Soule, that is. You look at Miss Lepird out in the yard, well, she's shot in the back. I have to reemphasize this as well. In human anatomy, and as the way we look at the human body in the morgue, our back, that area between our shoulder blades, ranging from shoulder to shoulder, we don't refer to that as the back. We refer to that as the posterior chest. So you're just looking at the chest only from a back view. So if you're shot in the back many times, that can also clip a lung. So maybe she's aspirating blood as well and spewing it out. Then if her airway has been compromised at all, vis-a-vis her throat being this attempt to cut her throat, you've got deposition there, and then to be beaten about the head.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got this wheelbarrow full of evidence that not only do you have to make the bodies go away and get them out of sight, you got to make the evidence, all of the associated peripheral evidence, disappear as well. It is a monumental task.
That's why I said if you're doing one person at a time, it's one thing. But when you're talking about killing two people, now you've got to get rid of two bodies. And in this particular case, he doesn't have a real plan. He actually decides, I'm going to wrap them in plastic and put them in the back of a truck. He covers it with dirt, leaves, whatever, boards, whatever he can find. And it sits there for a couple of days. However, when friends and family start coming by and looking for Joey Soule and for Jaclyn Lepird, can't get them on the phone. They're nowhere they normally are. And now, hey, you're the landlord. Where are they? So what old Chad Allen Reed does is he decides, I got to get them off my property. So they've been on the property for a couple of days, dead, wrapped in plastic, in a truck. He then drives them to a garage. At first, I thought it meant like an underground parking area, but that's not what this is at all. It's like a garage that you work on cars that's not being used anymore, correct?
Yeah, and actually it turns out that I think that the garage is pretty much immediately adjacent to his home. The thing about it is this, and I've always been fascinated with the psychology of this, Dave. Why is it that perpetrators insufficiently put distance between themselves and the bodies? And I think a lot of it has to do with wanting to have control. And you had mentioned it, you made a great point just a moment ago, how he's moving the bodies around.
Mm-hmm.
See, if you can still exercise control with the bodies, who's going to see them, where they're going to go. However, that creates a major problem for you, because if the bodies are found approximating the area where you are domiciled, you're going to be the first person they're going to look at because you have control over those remains at that point in time. And again, it brings us back to the big question: what in the world are you going to do with a couple of dead bodies?
And apparently he couldn't think past it. This is as far as his thinking took him, was to get them out of his yard and over in another facility, which you say is right next door. But let me ask you this, Joe, because
Yeah, buddy.
I went ahead. I'm picturing I'm not being gross, but I'm picturing these dead people being wrapped up in plastic, being totally disregarded as human beings, as people who possessed life up until the moment this man took it from them. I thought Battle Creek, Michigan would be cooler at least, but it really wasn't. During the course of the week that the bodies were in the back of his truck, daytime highs in the upper 60s, low 70s, overnight lows in the upper 40s, fairly moderate temps. I have a feeling the bodies wrapped in plastic are not going to be smelling too good right about now.
No. And as a matter of fact, let's just say, and this always fascinated me as well with cases that I worked where, and even in South Louisiana where I had a number of bodies that were dumped, people would always take like either plastic sheeting or shower curtain. Shower curtains are very common, and wrap bodies in them, cocooning them, and then, discarding them. And here's the problem with that. First off, you're protecting any evidence that's there, which we love. All right. You're trying to create a barrier so you're not going to leave blood behind, which generally doesn't work. You're going to leave something behind. But here's the other thing. If you're trying to mask these individuals, this is not a breathable material. Say if we had something that was like a canvas, perhaps, that you'd wrap the bodies in with plastic sweats. And not to mention, they're clothed as well. So you're creating this environment where the process, even though it's in the 60s and 70s, it's not necessarily in the 80s, but it's 60s and 70s, it's still comfortably warm outside. You're going to bring about the process of decomposition much more quickly. Imagine, if you will, you're the perpetrator, you're not around dead bodies at all, and you can't escape the smell. You walk past the garage, and let me tell you something. It doesn't matter if you're in the street. It doesn't matter if you're across the street. If there's a dead body times 2 now that is in that garage, dude, you're going to smell it. And can you imagine how paranoid that would make you even if you shut the door, even if you went out with a can of Lysol, it's not going to knock the smell down. It's not going to do it. You're still going to smell these bodies. And this began to eat at him. And for whatever reason, this area where they had rented out in this home that they shared with this fellow, the house caught on fire. And what was really kind of tragic about this, and the family members that you had mentioned earlier, Dave, had been coming around looking for these two people.
Right.
They said, if we could just have something that smelled like our loved one to take back with us, we'd love it. We'd love to have it. But most of their belongings were actually destroyed. And you begin to think about how, if you've ever had a house fire or anything like that, everything smells like smoke. And that's what the families were faced with. And I think that it left a big question for the police. What was this individual trying to destroy by setting this place on fire? And you can see at the crime scene, this house, the whole rear end of the house is like just charred, super charred. This goes to another point that you had made, Dave. This is highly disorganized behavior on his part. You got multiple weapons. You've got this thing where he doesn't take them out in the woods and execute them, and does it in kind of a sequestered environment. He's not just using one weapon. And you're going to wrap the bodies up then in plastic and put them in the back of your truck? It escapes logical thought as far as I'm concerned.
They set up a tip line. The police did, thankfully, because the person who called the tip line the most with the most credible information as to what happened, Chad Allen Reed. He called the tip line himself and confessed to the crime.
When he literally turns himself in, Dave, there are a couple of the authorities had kind of, I guess, postulated over this, thinking that this is a fellow who was riddled with guilt over what he had done. Now, whether or not he has remorse over it, I have no idea. That's between him and the sweet Lord. But at For some reason, after these days of living with these bodies and trying to work this problem out and never having any success at putting distance between himself and these deeds, he couldn't take it anymore. And of course, he winds up being taken into custody. A jury did in fact find Reed guilty of second-degree murder related to Mr. Soule's death, and then first-degree murder in connection with Lepard's death, probably having to do with the brutality of that murder. All in all, he was sentenced to 125 years to life with a chance of parole. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.